Hey, welcome to Today Matters, our daily devotional in the Word of God, and I am taking you through the book of Colossians, one devotional at a time. And as we move through verse by verse today, we're focusing on the first part of Colossians 3:13, and then in the next devotional, we're going to look at the second part. But Colossians 3:13 says this: "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive, as the Lord forgave you." Paul says here to the Colossian church to bear with each other. Now, this is exactly what we're talking about during our summer series that we're calling Relationship Rehab. We're learning what this means in order to have the kind of relationships that we're really supposed to have as Christians. We're talking about how there's no perfect marriages and there are no perfect relationships, but there are things that we can do in our relationships to make them the best that they can possibly be this side of heaven. Now, one of the things that we must do in our marriages and in our relationships is to bear with each other through thick and thin. Now, when Paul says this, to bear with each other is defined from the original Greek as to endure, to hold out in spite of persecution, threats, injury, indifference, or complaints, and don't retaliate. So it characterized the Apostle Paul himself, who told the Corinthians, we work hard with our own hands, and when we are cursed, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure it. That comes from 1 Corinthians 4:12. Now, this is the opposite of our culture today. Whenever someone says anything of their own opinion, somebody's offended or they get their feelings hurt. And since you don't agree with them, they want to cancel you. That's today's cancel culture. Instead, Paul says, no. You need to bear with one another. Now, this kind of bearing with one another was not what was happening in the Corinthian church. The church in Corinth, that's why sometimes I refer to it as First Californians or Second Californians, because the Corinthian church was as jacked up as California in a lot of ways, okay? And it was behaving just like the culture, and Paul harshly rebuked them multiple times. The Corinthians were actually taking each other to court. They were suing each other as Christians, and instead of following the biblical patterns of disagreement and reconciliation, they were suing each other and their witness as a church. Their witness as Christians is getting ruined. And Paul says instead of taking fellow believers to court, he goes in 1 Corinthians 6:7, why not be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? And he says in Ephesians 4:2, believers are to exhibit forbearance. Now, this forbearance, it really characterized the church in Thessalonica, of whom Paul wrote, we ourselves speak proudly of you among the churches of God for your perseverance and faith in the midst of all the persecutions and afflictions which you endure. Now, this term here, Anexomai, is the same term that's used in Colossians 3:13 when he says endure there. 2 Thessalonians 1:4 also uses that term. To bear with one another is to Anexomai, endure. So in the midst of all the difficulties, in the midst of the trials and tribulations, we must Anexomai with one another. I'll close with this. Anexomai, enduring, bearing with one another, has been especially hard coming out of this year with COVID. People's nerves are frayed and tensions are high. We've got to be able to overcome this by adhering to these scriptural principles like enduring, bearing with one another. If you're struggling with this with someone in particular, bring it to God. Ask Him for the extra portion of endurance today, because today matters.